They say the land don't forgive easy, that once it takes something from you, it don't give it back. But on the last morning of November, just before the sun cracked the ice off the cabin windows, Everett McCall found a reason to question that. He was out early, like always. The frost made the boards on the porch groan under his boots and the cold bit straight through his coat, but he didn't mind. He'd lived out in this stretch of Wyoming long enough to know the silence was its own kind of prayer. The storm, last night, had left everything quiet, blanketed in white except for one thing, a trail of footprints. Small and stumbling. He followed them half a mile down the ridge, heart thudding louder with every step. Then he saw her. A girl couldn't be more than 11 or 12, curled up beneath the pine. Arms wrapped around herself, dress torn and thin as paper. She looked like a ghost. Or maybe just someone the world forgot. Everett knelt beside her, took off his coat without thinking. "Hey now," he whispered, gentle, like talking to a skittish colt. "You're all right. I got you." Her eyes flickered, open, wide and wild, like she didn't know where she was. "Please don't leave me," she rasped, barely louder than the wind. He carried her back. Fire was already going in the hearth, stew from the night before warming on the stove. She didn't speak much that day, just kept her hands wrapped around the cup like it might disappear. He found out her name was Clara. No last name. Said her mama died last winter. Had been walking west, following the trail where she thought her kin might be. Everett didn't push. He knew what it meant to lose more than you could hold. His own wife had passed 5 years back in childbirth. Their baby didn't make it either. That cabin had felt like a tomb ever since, quiet, clean, and aching with things never said. But Clara brought something into it, something warm, even if it was just the sound of another breath in the room. He let her stay. Said it was just till she was strong enough to ride. But every day stretched longer. She took to the horses like she'd been raised in a saddle, helped with the chores without being asked, laughed once when a chicken chased her clean across the yard. That laugh stuck in his chest the rest of the day. Still, Everett couldn't shake the feeling there was more to the story. Nights he'd see her staring into the fire, eyes far away, like she was waiting for something, or someone. Then one evening, while stacking firewood, he noticed the way she tucked a locket into her dress. She always wore it. Never let it out of sight. "That your mama's?" he asked gently. She nodded. Said I should never lose it. Her voice caught. Said it was the only truth I had. That night, when she was asleep, Everett sat by the hearth and stared at the fire for a long time. He wasn't sure why his hands were shaking, but deep down something in him was stirring, something that hadn't stirred since the day the doctor said his wife didn't make it. He reached for the whiskey but stopped short. Instead, he walked to her room. Quiet, careful, just to check, he told himself. Just to make sure she was all right. The locket had fallen beside her pillow, and when he picked it up, he froze. There, behind the worn metal frame, was a photo. Faded, but clear. It was a picture of his wife, holding a baby, and on the back, in the handwriting he hadn't seen in over a decade, were just 3 words. Her name's Clara. Everett didn't sleep that night. The photograph weighed heavy in his hand, heavier than any rifle or saddle he'd ever carried. He just sat there, in the glow of the dying fire, saw those years, all that grief. The doctor told him the baby was stillborn. Margaret passed before sunrise, and the midwife didn't say much. He buried them both on the ridge and tried to keep going, one quiet day after another. But now he wondered what kind of lie had been told. Morning came gray and cold. Clara stirred in the back room, still too thin, still too small for her age. But she moved with a kind of resilience Everett recognized, like something in her refused to break, no matter what the trail had done to her. When she sat down at the table and offered him that shy, crooked smile, he had to look away. There was too much of Margaret in her face. He didn't say anything about the locket. Not yet. Instead, he poured her some coffee, half cream like his wife used to do. "You sleep all right?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Better than before." "Before what?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Before I had a roof. That didn't leak." He chuckled softly. "Fair enough." There was peace in that morning, simple and honest. But Everett's heart wasn't at ease, so while Clara fed the chickens, he rode into town. Dr. Redmond had long since passed, but Miss Harriet, the old midwife, still lived above the general store. She was near blind now, skin like parchment, but her memory was sharp as ever. He asked her about that day, about Margaret the baby. Her hands trembled. I wasn't supposed to say nothing, she whispered. The doctor made the call. Said it'd be easier if you thought the child died. Said you were already shattered. Enough. Everett felt like the wind had been knocked out of him. So, she lived? Yes, Everett. Margaret gave her up, quiet-like. Sent her east with a cousin. She was afraid you wouldn't be able to raise her alone out here. Thought she was doing right by the child. He didn't remember leaving, just remembered the road stretching out. In front of him, snow melting in patches under a timid sun and that sick weight in his chest growing heavier with every mile. That night, when Clara was brushing her hair in front of the hearth, he sat down across from her. Cleared his throat. You ever wonder about your daddy? He asked. She blinked. Sometimes. Mama didn't say much. Just that he lived out west. Said he was good once, but he'd been broken. Everett's voice cracked. She say his name? Not, really. Only that he liked black coffee and carving little animals out of wood. His heart just about broke clean in two. He reached into his coat and set the locket down on the table between them. I reckon there's something you ought to know. Clara looked at it, then back at him. She didn't say anything right away. Just slowly opened the locket and stared at the photo. I found it last night, Everett said, his voice no more than gravel and regret. That's Margaret, my wife, your mama. Her breath caught. Then that means... He nodded. You're my daughter, Clara. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just stared at him like the whole world had shifted under her feet, and in a way it had. Finally, she whispered, Why didn't you come for me? Everett's eyes filled before he could stop them. I thought you were gone. I buried a grave, with no baby inside. I didn't know, Clara. God help me, I didn't know. She looked down at the photo again. Her small hands trembled, and then after a long, impossible silence, she whispered, I always wondered why I didn't look like the other folks I lived with. Why I liked the smell of horses and the sound of the wind. He reached out, hesitantly, and rested a hand over hers. You got more of this land in you than you know. Same as your mama, same as me. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. Then Clara whispered, Can I stay? Everett's voice cracked again. You ain't going anywhere, sweetheart. Not now. Not ever. Tomorrow they face the truth of being strangers with the same blood, and what it really means to build a family from what's been broken. But before we come back, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story hit home for you, make sure you're subscribed, because I've saved something even more special for you tomorrow. For the next few days, neither of them quite knew how to act. Everett still rose before dawn, fed the horses, chopped wood and lit the stove like always. But now every glance toward the small bedroom down the hall carried something heavier than habit. That room wasn't just for a stranger anymore. It held his daughter, flesh and blood. The child he'd once mourned and buried in his mind. And Clara, she kept moving like she didn't quite believe it. She swept the porch, helped with the hens, even tried her hand at mending socks by the fire. But every so often, she'd glance at him out the corner of her eye, quiet, searching, like she was trying to line up this weather-worn rancher with the picture of a father she'd carried in her head all those years. One morning as they saddled up to ride into town for supplies, Everett handed her the reins to his wife's old mare, Jubilee. Figured she'd suit you better than that stubborn mule, he said gently. Clara blinked. She was your wife's horse? He nodded. A little temperamental but strong. Margaret used to say she was the only thing out here more stubborn than me. Clara ran a hand along Jubilee's neck, her expression soft. She's beautiful. They rode in mostly, silence that day, hooves crunching against frozen ground, the wind sighing low through the cottonwoods. When they reached town, folks turned their heads. A few recognized Everett, nodded politely, but they stared at Clara a little longer. Children didn't just appear out of nowhere. And in a place like Cotton Bend, stories traveled faster than horses. Inside the mercantile, Miss Lottie leaned over the counter, eyes narrowing. And who might this be, Everett? He kept his voice calm. This here's Clara, my daughter. The silence that followed was sharp and immediate. Miss Lottie's face twitched. Didn't know you had one. Neither did I, he said, meeting her gaze square. But life's full of things we don't expect. Clara stayed close that whole trip. Watched everything from the shelves lined with flour and nails to the quiet judgment in people's eyes. On the way back, she asked, "Do they think I don't belong?" Everett's jaw tightened. "They don't know what to think, that's all. Ain't your burden to carry." "But you feel it too," she said softly. He couldn't lie. "I do." Back at the cabin, the sky broke open into a slow snowfall, flakes drifting like whispers across the yard. Inside, Clara stirred the stew while Everett whittled a scrap of pine. He used to do that every winter, little animals and birds, just to keep his hands busy. She watched his knife move with quiet precision. "Did you ever make one for me?" He paused, looked up. "I made dozens. Just never had the heart to finish them." She nodded slowly, then reached over and handed him a new block of wood. "Maybe. You could make me one now?" His throat caught. "Yeah, I think I could." That night, long after she went to bed, he carved well into the dark. A small horse, rough around the edges, but strong. He thought of Margaret, of the years he lost, of the girl who had somehow found her way back to him through snow, lies, and silence. He set the carving on her windowsill before dawn. When she found it the next morning, she didn't say a word, just walked up behind him in the kitchen and hugged him tight around the waist. He froze for a second, then let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, and wrapped his arms around her too. For the first time since the day Margaret died, the cabin didn't feel hollow. It felt alive. And for the first time, Everett didn't feel like he was just surviving the days. He felt like he was beginning something. Spring hadn't fully come yet, but the snow had started to recede. Patches of brown earth peeked through the frost near the barn, and the creek behind the cabin whispered again under the ice. Life was returning, slow, quiet, and cautious, just like them. Everett had begun teaching Clara how to mend tack, how to spot signs of colic in horses, how to cut fence wire without slicing open her hand. She was a quick learner, smarter than most boys he'd ever hired and far more patient. But there were things she didn't say. Shadows in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. Truth was, they were still two strangers trying to build a bridge across 16 years of silence and lies. That bridge began to wobble one afternoon while they were sitting on the porch, watching the sky change over the ridge. Clara turned toward him, hands folded in her lap, and said softly, "Can I ask you something real?" Everett looked over, chewing a blade of straw. "Course. Why didn't Mama tell you I was alive?" He felt the wind change. A gust came down the valley, shaking the wind chimes. He swallowed hard. "She thought it was best," he said finally. She was sick, scared. The world felt heavy to her near the end. Clara didn't speak, just stared down at her boots. Everett added she didn't want to burden me, thought I'd bury her in the pain and keep going. "Did you?" His jaw clenched. "No, I didn't." There was a long pause. Then Clara said, "She used to cry at night. I'd hear her whisper your name sometimes, but I never knew what you looked like, not until I saw your face on that hill with the shotgun in your hands." He chuckled softly. "Not exactly the dream reunion, was it?" She smiled a little, then hesitated again. "But if she lied to you once, how do I know you won't lie to me too?" That hit deeper than any wound Everett had ever taken, a slow, quiet pain that reached back through the years and settled in his bones. "I guess you don't," he said gently. "But I'll tell you this, Clara. There ain't a single lie I've got left in me. Not after what life's already taken." Her voice trembled. "I want to believe you." He nodded. "Then give it time. Truth don't always show up all at once. Sometimes it grows slow, like spring after a long winter." She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. That night they ate stew together, and she told him about the farm she was raised on, about the cousin who drank too much and the wife who never smiled, about sleeping in the hayloft when the shouting got too loud. "I always wanted a window," she whispered, "one that looked out at something wide, something that didn't feel like a cage." Everett stared at her. "You've got one now, faces west." She nodded, eyes glassy. "I know, I just ain't sure how to live with peace yet. I don't trust it." He reached across the table and set his hand over hers. "That's all right, honey. Peace don't ask you to trust it right away, just asks that you sit with it a while." Later that night, when the wind howled and the fire snapped low, Everett stood at the edge of the porch, staring out into the dark. Snowflakes danced beneath the moonlight. Behind him, Clara's soft humming drifted through the cabin walls. An old tune, half remembered. He closed his eyes. Some things didn't need to be fixed all at once. Some things just needed to be stayed. With it was a quiet Thursday when the past came riding in. Everett was hitching a fence post down by the creek when he heard the distant clop of hooves. Not fast. Not urgent. Just steady and sure, like someone who knew the trail well enough to take their time. He looked up, wiped the sweat from his brow, and saw a gray gelding crest the ridge. The rider wore a faded brown coat, slouched like the years had pressed down, hard. But even from a distance, Everett knew that shape, that posture. Ray Carter, he muttered. The name tasted like old nails. Ray was Margaret's cousin, older, sharper, and always a little too slick for Everett's liking. He hadn't seen him since the funeral. Back then, Ray didn't say much, just showed up late, offered a handshake with dry eyes, and left early. That was 20 years ago. Now he was trotting down the trail toward the cabin like nothing had passed between them. Didn't think I'd find you still breathing, Ray called out as he dismounted. Everett didn't smile. What the hell brings you here, Ray? The older man dusted off his coat. Same thing that brought Clara, I reckon. Everett stiffened. What do you know about her? Ray shrugged. Enough. More than you. From the looks of it. Clara stepped out from the barn just then, holding a coil of rope. When she saw Ray, she froze. He tipped his hat. Well, I'll be damned. You're her spittin' image, you know that? Margaret would have been proud. Clara looked from Ray to Everett, confusion and something colder flickering across her face. Who is he? Name's Ray Carter, the man said before Everett could answer. Your mama's kin. We helped raise you after she passed. Helped, Everett echoed bitterly. Ray shot him a sharp look. Easy, Everett. You gave up the right to judge when you stopped writing. I didn't stop, Everett growled. She stopped answering. Ray sighed and pulled a weathered envelope from his coat pocket. That's 'cause she couldn't. He handed it over. Everett took it with trembling hands. The paper was soft with time, the edges curled, the ink faded, but still legible. Everett, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't hold on any longer. Clara's alive, and she's everything we ever dreamed she'd be. I didn't tell you because I was scared. You were angry when I left, and I didn't know if you'd ever forgive me. I didn't know if you could. But she deserves more than what I've given her. If someday she finds her way back to you, please don't turn her away. She'll need your strength, and maybe you'll need hers too. Margaret Everett stood still as stone. He didn't notice the breeze picking up, or the way Clara moved closer to read over his shoulder. He just stared at that last line. Over and over. She had wanted this, had hoped for it, even with her last breath. Clara whispered, She wrote this? Everett nodded. Looks like, Ray said quietly. I found it tucked in the old Bible, meant to bring it sooner. But I didn't think you'd want to see me. Everett finally looked him in the eye. You were right, Ray exhaled. I'm sorry, Everett, for everything I did and didn't do. There was no apology big enough to fix 2 decades of silence. But in that moment it didn't matter, because something shifted in Clara's eyes. The distance she'd held, the tension she carried, it cracked just a little, like something inside her had been waiting to know she wasn't just abandoned, that someone, anyone, had hoped she'd make it here. Later that evening, Everett sat by the fire, the letter on his lap. Clara knelt beside him, her voice soft. I think she wanted us to save each other. Everett nodded. I think you're right. They sat in silence a while, just watching the flames. Outside, the wind had settled. The night was still, and for the first time in years, Everett felt like maybe he wasn't living in the ruins of what once was. Maybe he was standing at the edge of what could be. Clara rose early the next morning, before the sun had cleared the ridgeline. The frost still clung to the window panes, but she was already lacing her boots. There was something in her chest that wouldn't let her stay in bed. Not worry exactly, but a stirring. A weight shifting inside her. Everett heard the front door open and watched from the kitchen as she crossed the yard, walking slow toward the creek. She hadn't said much after Ray left the day before. Just sat with him in quiet, holding her. Mother's letter like it might vanish if she blinked too long. He didn't follow her right away. Instead, he let the coffee boil over a low flame and thought about what it meant to have someone in the house again. The sound of footfalls on the stairs, the hum of a girl hanging laundry, the occasional slam of a door when she got frustrated with a knotted rope. He'd gotten used to silence, but now, silence felt too loud without her in the room. Out by the creek, Clara sat on a flat rock, knees drawn up, watching the thin ice crackle along the edges of the water. When Everett approached, he didn't speak, just lowered himself beside her, his old knees protesting the cold. She glanced over, eyes tired but calm. "Did she ever talk about me?" she asked. Everett rubbed his hands together, blowing into them. "Only once, near the end. Just said she had something worth fighting for." "I thought she meant her health." Clara gave a dry laugh. "Guess she meant me." "You were always her fight," he said, even when she thought she couldn't win it. There was a pause. Then Clara said, almost shyly, "Do you want me to stay here?" Everett didn't answer right away. He watched a hawk circle above the pines before finally saying, "I want you to stay if it means something to you, not because you think you owe me or her or anybody." Clara nodded slowly. "I don't know if this is home yet." "It don't have to be," he said gently. "Not right now." She looked at him. "But maybe it could be." He met her gaze. "I'd like that." Back at the cabin, she hung her coat on the peg by the door like it had always belonged there. Everett noticed it, the small shift, like she'd moved from visitor to resident, like maybe for the first time she wasn't just passing through. That afternoon they worked together to fix the old chicken coop. Clara held the boards while Everett hammered, and they argued about whether the hens needed more space. She wanted to name them. He told her not to get attached. Later, while unpacking a box of old linens from the loft, Clara found a small wooden tin. Inside was a ring. Gold, scratched, too small for Everett's fingers now. She brought it to him after supper. Was this hers? Everett took it, turned it slowly in his calloused fingers. Yeah. She gave it back when she left. Said she couldn't wear it and lied to herself at the same time. Clara studied his face. "Do you still love her?" He looked up, eyes misty but clear. "I never stopped." She didn't speak after that, just touched his shoulder once and walked to her room. That night she opened the window above her bed and listened to the sounds of the ranch, the creak of the barn gate in the wind, the soft lowing of the cattle, the distant howl of a coyote far off in the hills. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she needed to run. She closed her eyes with the scent of pine and old wood filling her lungs, and somewhere deep inside, something clicked into place. Not completely, not cleanly, but enough. Enough to believe she could stay, enough to believe she was wanted. The sky turned the color of bruised iron that morning. The wind picked up from the north, sharp and dry, kicking dust across the fields and rattling the shutters. Everett stood on the porch, mug in hand, watching the horizon the way only a man who's buried fences before could. He didn't need a barometer to tell him what was coming. He could feel it in his bones. "Storm's comin'," he said. Clara came out beside him, arms crossed against the cold. "Bad?" He nodded. "Worst kind. Spring thunder over dry land. Lightning with no rain." The words sat heavy between them. Fires were the thing folks feared most around here. More than wolves or drought or isolation. Fire didn't just take what you had, it left you with ashes of things you couldn't rebuild. By noon, the wind had turned violent. Dust stung the skin, and the horses grew restless in the barn. Everett and Clara worked fast, boarding windows and soaking the ground around the cabin. He showed her how to smother embers before they caught, how to move the cattle if it came to that. She didn't ask questions, just followed his lead, hands dirty, sleeves rolled, jaw set. But sometime around 3, a crack of lightning hit the far ridge, and within minutes, black smoke was rising like a flag of warning. Everett squinted into the hills. "That's near Miller's place." "You think they'll need help?" Clara asked. He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her, then back at the hills. "I think we're all going to need help if it jumps the creek." They worked until sundown. The fire hadn't crossed the water yet, but the wind was wrong and dry pine carried flame like kindling. At one point, Everett lost sight of the sun altogether, just smoke and dust and a burning smell that stuck to your teeth. Then, in the Middle of the chaos, the bell rang at the front gate. Clara opened the door and saw a boy, maybe 10, coughing and breathless. "Mr. Miller said to come," he gasped. "Mama says we gotta leave. Fire's too close." Everett came up behind her, already grabbing his coat. "Get the wagon, we'll ride." They packed quick: water, blankets, supplies. Clara helped the boy up while Everett hitched the horses. The ride into the hills was slow, smoke thick as fog. Clara's eyes burned and her heart thudded like a drum in her chest. When they reached the Miller homestead, the fire was licking at the ridge behind the barn. The family had already packed most of their things, but there was panic in the air. Everett jumped down, shouting instructions. "Get the old folks in first, leave the tools, just take the essentials." Clara helped load the wagon, moving fast. And then she heard it, the sharp, panicked scream of a horse. She turned to see the Miller's filly stuck in a side pen, wild-eyed and trapped by a fallen beam. "Clara!" Everett called. "Leave it." But she didn't. She ran. The gate was hot to the touch, the wood crackling, the sky red above her. She ducked low, grabbed a halter, and moved slow, whispering steady. "Easy, girl. Easy." She didn't know where the calm came from. Maybe her mother's voice, maybe her own. But it worked. The filly let her close enough to slip the rope on and lead her out, just as a second tree cracked and fell behind them. When she made it back to the wagon, Everett was pale and silent, but he helped her up without a word. They rode through smoke and wind until the fire was behind them, and the valley opened into dusk. By the time they made it home, the wind had died, and so had something else. Some wall between them that neither had acknowledged before. Clara climbed down and turned to him. Her face was streaked with ash, her eyes red but steady. "I wasn't going to leave her behind," she said. Everett nodded. "I know." She was scared. "I've been that scared." He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were braver than I ever was," he said, "and your mama, and she'd be proud." That night they didn't talk much, just sat by the fire, each nursing their quiet thoughts while the wind finally laid down and the stars came out one by one. Sometimes storms don't tear things apart. Sometimes they clear the air. The storm had passed, but its weight lingered in the air like smoke that wouldn't lift. The hills still smelled of scorched pine, and ash drifted down some mornings like snow, settling into every crack and corner. Clara woke to that stillness a few days later, the kind that follows something big. Not fear, not sadness, just pause, like life was holding its breath. She spent the morning cleaning out the old trunk in Everett's storage loft, one she'd avoided before. It was heavy, both in weight and memory. Dust clung thick and the leather straps cracked when she opened it. Inside were mostly forgotten things: baby clothes too small for any child now, a pair of worn-out boots, a Bible with water stains along the spine, and near the bottom under a faded quilt she found the stack: letters. Some sealed, some folded, all with her mother's handwriting. Tight cursive. Blue ink. Some yellowed with time, others fresher, like they'd been added one at a time over years. She sat there, cross-legged on the floor, and read. Some were addressed to no one. Some said, "To Everett," or "To Clara when she's ready." The earliest, dated back over a decade. In them, her mother spoke with a clarity Clara had never heard before. "I thought leaving was my only choice," one letter said. "I was wrong. I was scared. But I always knew he had love left in him." Another, "If Clara finds this one day, I want her to know I never stopped wanting more for her, I just didn't know how to give it." Clara read for what felt like hours. Tears came quietly, not in a rush, but slowly, the way grief works when it's been waiting. She brought the letters down to the kitchen where Everett was fixing the hinges on the back door. He looked up, confused. "These were hers," Clara said. "You kept them." He stood there for a long moment, then sat. "I didn't know you'd find them," he said. "Did you ever read them?" He shook his head. "No, couldn't." She sat across from him. "She wrote one for me, said she wanted me to come back someday, that maybe you'd still be here, that maybe we could forgive each other." Everett rubbed his hands over his face, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I spent a lot of years blaming her. Then I spent some blaming myself, but I never blamed you." Clara looked down. "I blamed all of us." There was silence, the kind that doesn't hurt but makes room for something new. Then Everett spoke, soft but steady. "When you showed up at my gate, I thought you were another stranger passing through, But you weren't. You were the piece I'd been missing, and didn't know how to ask for. Clara felt something shift again. Another thread pulled tight between them. She got up, walked around the table, and placed the stack of letters in front of him. "Maybe you should read them," she said. "When you're ready." He nodded, and for the first time in years his eyes held water without shame. That night they sat by the fire like always. But instead of the silence, Clara picked up the letters again, reading one aloud. A small one, just a note, really. "He doesn't say much, but he listens when it matters. That's why I loved him. That's why I still do, even now." She looked up, the fire dancing in her eyes. Everett didn't say a word. He just reached across, laid a hand over hers, and held it there. Some truths take a long time to land. Some forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken. And some healing. Well, it starts in the quiet with a letter you were finally ready to read. By the time spring truly settled in, the land began to breathe again. The hills turned green where fire hadn't touched, and even the blackened trees stood a little prouder, like they'd survived something they weren't meant to. Clara started riding farther each morning, out past the creek where the deer came, down, past the old trail where Everett once found her slumped in the dust. She didn't say why she went. Didn't need to. Everett knew. She was looking for something. Maybe not a place, maybe just an answer. One morning she came back to the cabin with a quiet look in her eyes. She didn't speak for a while, just set her hat down, poured coffee, and sat beside Everett on the porch. The kind of sitting where you say the big thing without words. "I've been thinking about leaving," she finally said, eyes on the hills. Everett didn't flinch. He nodded, slow. "Yeah, I figured." She looked at him then, unsure, almost apologetic. "It's not that I don't want to stay, it's just I've never been anywhere but running or hiding. I want to see something new. Make a life that's mine, not just my mother's shadow or your second chance." He let that settle. Then he looked out over the pasture, where the cattle grazed in the gold light. "Your mama used to say the same thing," he said. "Said the valley was beautiful, but it wasn't wide enough for her dreams. I didn't understand it back then. Thought wanting more meant you didn't love what you had, but I get it now." Clara swallowed. "You mad?" He shook his head. "No, sweetheart, I'd only be mad if you stayed for me." There it was, the thing she needed to hear. She reached for his hand. He let her hold it. "I don't know where I'll go yet. Might head west. Maybe the coast," she said. "Whatever you choose," Everett said, his voice steady. "Just make sure it's a life you picked, not one you owed." They spent the next few days packing a small satchel. Nothing heavy, some clothes, a map, a tin of her mother's old letters. Everett added a pocket knife and a canteen without saying anything. On her last morning, Clara saddled up early. The sky was pale blue, and the wind was soft. The kind of morning that makes you believe in fresh starts. Everett stood beside the horse, one hand on the reins. "You ride safe," he said. "I will. If you ever want to come back, I know." She leaned down and wrapped her arms around him, and he held her tight. Not like a man clinging, like a man letting go the right way. As she rode down the path, she turned once, at the same bend where she first saw the cabin smoke rise all those months ago. Everett was still standing, their hat in hand, just watching, like he always did. And in that moment neither of them said goodbye. Because goodbye meant done. And they weren't done. Not ever. A year passed like a whisper. Seasons shifted over the valley. Snow came and went. The creek rose and fell. And Everett stayed, kept the ranch running slow and steady. Not for profit, just for rhythm. Just to keep his hands busy and his heart from getting too quiet. He still rose before dawn, still brewed coffee thick as tar, still sat on the porch most mornings, looking toward the hills. But now there was something different in him. Not sadness, not even longing. Just peace. The kind that only comes after a man's walked through every storm and come out on the other side with less weight and more understanding. Every now and then a letter would arrive, folded neat. No return address, just his name. Inside, bits and pieces of Clara's new life. "I'm in Sacramento now. Got a job working with horses. Funny how some things come full circle. Found a little boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Ellen. She makes pie just like Mama did. It scares me how much I remember. I think about the ranch a lot. Sometimes I swear I smell smoke from your fireplace even out here. He kept every letter, tucked them into the drawer by his bed. Then, one late summer evening, just as the light was breaking soft over the hills, Everett saw it, thin, curling smoke rising from the old trail. The same trail Clara had come down all those months ago. He stood slowly, heart steady, not rushing, just knowing. By the time the horse came into view, he was already at the gate. She looked older somehow, not worn, just stronger. Her shoulders carried a kind of certainty now, the kind only earned. She swung down from the saddle, and for a long second neither of them spoke. Then she smiled. I had a week off. Thought I'd ride back for a visit, she said. He nodded. You hungry? Starving, she said, grinning. They walked side by side toward the cabin. No weight between them anymore, just space they both chose to fill. That night they sat by the fire again, same chairs, same crackle, but everything had changed. Clara pulled a small box from her bag and set it on the table. What's that? Everett asked. Found this in a second-hand shop in the city. Thought it looked like something you'd use. He opened it. An old compass, polished smooth, still pointing true. Figured you spent enough years being lost, she teased gently. He laughed, real and deep. Guess we both did. The wind blew through the trees outside, warm and steady. Clara leaned back in her chair. I still don't know where I'm going next. You'll figure it out, Everett said. And wherever you go, just remember this place, this porch, this fire, it's part of you now. Always will be. She nodded. I know. And for the first time in both their lives, they didn't feel broken. Didn't feel like pieces trying to fit. They were whole. Because healing doesn't always come in big moments. Sometimes it's just two people sitting by the fire knowing the worst is behind them and the rest is theirs to choose. If this story stayed with you, take a breath and let it sink in. These stories are here to remind us that even in the harshest lands, love finds a way to grow back. If you felt that in your chest, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you're not subscribed yet, this might be the quiet sign you were waiting for. We'll see you again real soon.